Sit here, my dear. I know that life now is very different from my time, but there are things we carry inside us that don't change, no matter how much time passes. I've lived an entire life trying to understand certain things. I've been through much suffering, and even after all these years, some questions still linger in my mind. It's hard to admit, but it's the truth. I was deceived for a lifetime, and he died without ever explaining himself. Maybe, if I had asked the right questions, if I had been braver, I could have avoided so much suffering. But no matter how much I think, I'll never have all the answers. I only know that, somehow, pain taught me what life wanted to teach me. Before I start, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing that my story is reaching different places. I was so young when we got married, barely understanding what true love was. He seemed like the perfect man, always so caring, so attentive to my needs. In those days, marriage was like a sacred ritual, something you didn't question. When he asked me to marry him, I accepted, sure that I had made the right choice. That man, who seemed to be everything I wanted, was my only certainty. In those simple words, I felt like I was taking a step toward a life of happiness. But what I didn't know, my dear, was that I was putting my whole life in the hands of someone who only knew how to deceive me. Things started slowly. He always had that reserved, distant way about him, but I believed it was because of work, because of the responsibilities he carried. For years, I dedicated myself to our home, giving everything I had to make sure our house was a happy one. My children grew, and I watched them become good people, with character. Everything seemed to be going well, but there was something I didn't see. I didn't know it, but he was deceiving me, and it went on for far longer than I could have imagined. In the beginning, it was small signs, things that seemed insignificant, but, over time, became too big to ignore. He started arriving later, without giving explanations. When I asked, he always had a ready excuse, something about work, about the city, about the difficulties of the day. I wanted to believe him. I knew he had no reason to lie, but still, something in my gut told me something was wrong. My heart tightened, but I pretended not to know anything. The fear of losing everything I had built spoke louder than reason. But it was one afternoon, my dear, that opened my eyes. I went out to do some shopping, as I always did, and when I came back, I found them. He was with her, in that house that was already mine, that house I thought was only ours. I don't know how to explain what I felt in that moment. A void, a bewilderment so great that it felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I saw them, so close, so intimate, as if nothing had belonged to me. She, my sister, the one I always considered my confidant, my friend. He, the man with whom I built my life. My head was spinning, and my heart seemed to stop beating. And still, I didn't say anything. I left without a word. What more could I say? I knew what was happening, but I didn't have the courage to ask. I didn't have the courage to hear the truth from him, the cruel truth that tore me apart inside. The shame of confronting him was greater than the pain, and I left as if I hadn't seen anything, as if nothing had happened. I shut myself off from the world, as if everything could go back to normal, as if what I knew hadn't changed everything. However, his silence began to weigh even more heavily. He avoided talking to me, avoided looking into my eyes. When we did speak, it seemed like he was afraid to say anything, as if he knew everything was clear to me. But he never apologized. He never had the courage to say what really happened. And I, increasingly, found myself consumed by a silent anger, an anger I didn't know how to deal with. What hurt me most, my dear, was knowing he never explained himself. He simply let the lie go on, day after day, as if it were easy. He hid behind excuses, he hid behind indifference, and I, no matter how hard I tried, couldn't find the words to speak to him. For years I lived in a silent prison. He never told me why he did what he did, and I never had the courage to ask, because I knew the answer would destroy me. Every time he looked at me, it seemed like he no longer saw the woman he had sworn to love. He saw only a shadow, someone he had deceived. But I, my dear, also no longer saw myself. The woman who trusted everything he said, the woman who believed in his word, no longer existed. She had been replaced by a woman full of unanswered questions, a woman full of pain and distrust. That silence became a sentence, a sentence I could never contest. And then he fell ill. What I feared, in truth, had already happened. He was weak. He was going away. And it was in that end of life that he finally asked for my forgiveness. He told me he regretted it, that he shouldn't have done what he did, that he loved me. But he never told me what happened. He died without explaining himself, and I was left with all the questions unanswered, with the weight of everything he never had the courage to say. I don't know if it was good or bad that he left like that. Maybe it was better. Maybe it was worse. I didn't know what to feel. I only knew that the life I had lived with him and the woman I had been would never be the same again. Today I can look back with a little more peace, but even today I still wonder if he knew he would leave me with this pain, with this lack of answers. I spent my whole life waiting for something that never came, and he died without giving me what I needed most. But perhaps, my dear, the forgiveness I was seeking wasn't in him, but in myself. I remember it like it was yesterday. The time when he appeared in my life was so brief, yet so significant, that it feels like it really was just yesterday, even though so much time has passed. I was just a young dreamer, full of hopes, with my eyes shining for the future. Back then, life had a simple rhythm, and for us, marriages were always grand moments of celebration. When he showed up, I couldn't see anything else. It was as if the sun had risen, just for the two of us. He was handsome, with that easy smile and the kind of confidence that made me believe he knew exactly what he wanted. When our eyes met for the first time, something happened inside of me. I couldn't explain it, but somehow, I felt that he was the man I would spend the rest of my life with. His eyes had a confidence I had never seen before, and I, knowing nothing of what was to come, thought it was something good, something I needed. I had my parents, the house from my childhood, and the warmth of family. I grew up surrounded by friends and simple people, and marriage was seen as the fulfillment of a dream, something sacred. When he appeared, I didn't think twice. He had something that enchanted me, something that couldn't be described with words. He gave me the impression that he was the answer to all my longings. I didn't know I was just beginning a journey I could never have imagined. He asked me to marry him in a simple way, with no big ceremonies, but with such sincerity that I couldn't say no. I remember that on one of those quiet Sundays, he took me to the riverbank, and there, with the calmness of the water reflecting the clear sky, he told me he wanted to spend his life by my side. I, still so young, accepted with full conviction, not knowing what my life would be like after that. Yes, I believed love, that pure emotion, was all we needed to be happy. In the first days, it was a dream. He treated me with care, with kindness. The way he took care of me, making me feel important, was something I never thought I'd experience. Every moment by his side seemed like a blessing. The afternoons we spent talking on the porch, the walks hand in hand through the dirt roads of our small town, were everything I could wish for. I had the world in my hands, and in that moment, I believed nothing could take that away from me. In the first months of marriage, life was really as I dreamed it would be. We built our home with great effort and dedication, a little piece of land that I knew would be our home for many years. He was a man of hard work, a good man, I thought. We woke up early every day, he went to the fields, and I stayed at home, taking care of the house and preparing meals for when he came back. The routine, though simple, was what made me feel that life was in the right place. I believed everything he said was true. I didn't question anything, because he was the man I loved. And for me, love meant trust. He always seemed so calm, so certain of what he was doing. I, on my part, dedicated myself to him, as every wife did at that time, believing that the foundation of everything was affection and devotion. I believed that over time, things would only get better, and that we would have children, that our house would fill with laughter and joy. Love seemed to be enough to ensure a happy future. But like any story, not everything was perfect. I didn't notice it right away, but the little things began to change. He started arriving home later, without giving explanations. When I asked, he always had a ready excuse. Something about work, about the city, about the difficulties of the day. At first I didn't worry. I believed it was natural for him to be busy with work, because as a husband, he had to provide for the family. But my intuition told me that something was starting to go wrong. I began to notice, in a nearly imperceptible way, that he was starting to be away more often. He would say he was going to a business meeting or that he needed to go to town for something important. At first, I accepted everything without questioning, until one afternoon, something made me look at him differently. He seemed hurried, nervous even. There was something in his posture that seemed off, as though he was trying to hide something. I asked what had happened, but he smiled and told me it was just the stress from work. I wanted to believe him, so I accepted his words. But deep down, something in me was starting to wonder if it wasn't all true. Months passed, and the signs became clearer, more evident. But even then, I preferred to ignore them. Marriage, work, routine, all of that kept me too busy to reflect on what was really happening. But more and more, he seemed different. He would be absent, wouldn't give explanations, and instead of getting closer to me, he would grow distant. I began to ask myself if I was doing something wrong, if what was happening was my fault, but he never gave me a direct answer. And so I got used to living with these questions unanswered, living with the silence that he left in every one of our conversations. I didn't know, my dear, that what I was living was not just a reflection of everyday life, but rather the forewarning of something much bigger, something that would change everything I believed to be true about him and our love. As the months went by, I began to notice some changes in him, but even then, I preferred to ignore them. I told myself it was just a passing phase, that it was the stress from work, the pressures of life. I didn't want to believe that the man I had married, the one I had dreamed of for so long, could be pulling away from me. After all, I had given everything I had to that house, to that marriage. How could he be so cruel as to leave me without even an explanation? The first sign that something was wrong came on a regular afternoon. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch for him, as I always did. He had promised to return early from the field, but it was already past 3 o'clock, and he hadn't given me any news. I started to worry. I grabbed the basket of fruit and went to the gate to see if he was approaching. The sun was strong that day, and I stood there waiting, with a tight feeling in my chest. When he finally showed up, his face was tense. He seemed tired, but in a different way. It was as though he had something on his mind that he didn't want to share with me. He came inside without giving me an explanation, only telling me that he needed to rest. I, without thinking too much, simply accepted it. But my heart wasn't at ease. There was something in those eyes that I couldn't decipher, something in his posture that made me feel uncomfortable. In the days that followed, I noticed more changes. He started arriving home later and later, always with ready excuses. I had to stop by Joan's house, the fence was broken, or I went to town to buy some tools. I ended up taking longer than I thought. The excuses always made sense, but something inside me told me it wasn't just that. I felt displaced, as though I was losing touch with him, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I began to wonder if I was overreacting. Was he really just too busy with work? Was he simply tired? And more importantly, did he still love me? The fear of asking and confronting the truth paralyzed me. I didn't know if I wanted to know the answer, because deep down, what I feared most of all was seeing that the lie was growing between us. One of those nights when he came home late, he told me he needed to go out once more to handle something in town. It was late, nearly midnight, and I noticed something strange. He was more dressed up than usual. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and a tie that he never wore for work in the field. It was as if he were going somewhere important, not to take care of business. But I didn't say anything. I stayed quiet, trying to understand, trying to deal with the feeling that something was breaking, but not wanting to admit it. He left, and that time, something told me to follow. I put on a simple dress, grabbed my hat, and went after him. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was happening. When I saw him enter Antonio's house, I stopped at the corner and watched. He went inside, and the door closed behind him. My heart beat faster, and a deep pain formed in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but at the same time, a part of me already knew the truth. I went back home that night without being able to say anything. When he came back, he seemed as if nothing had happened. He entered as if everything was normal, as if nothing had been broken between us. And I, my dear, kept following the same routine, pretending to be blind, believing it was just a phase. I believed it, until the moment when I could no longer deceive myself. The following weeks were tormenting. He kept going out, coming home late, and the excuses became more and more vague. When I asked why he was so distant, he told me that work was weighing on him more than usual, that he had to pay more attention to the problems on the farm. I wanted to believe him, but there was already a pain inside me that no longer allowed me to sleep in peace. I spent the days trying not to think, trying to move on with life, but the pain consumed me little by little. I didn't know what to do with what I was feeling. I knew he was hiding something from me, but I didn't want to see it. I tried to find some logical explanation, something that justified it all. After all, we had a good life, a home, children, everything seemed perfect. How could he be drifting away like this, without any explanation? Until one day, he came home earlier than usual. That day was different because he seemed anxious, even nervous. I watched him from a distance, unsure of what to expect. When he came near, he tried to embrace me, but I pulled away. Something inside me told me I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what was going on. That's when he told me he had to leave, that he was going to town again, but that he would return soon. And it was then, in that moment when he said this, that I realized something was terribly wrong. I knew he wasn't going to town. I knew he was lying to me again. Silence took over me that afternoon. I could no longer look at him the same way. He knew I knew, and I knew he knew that I knew, but neither of us spoke about it. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and cried. I cried because I knew something was breaking, but I didn't know how to fix it. I knew he was deceiving me, but I didn't know whether to face the truth or keep ignoring it. That's how, little by little, the pain became part of me. I didn't know what to do with everything that was happening. Every day felt like a silent battle, a weight that only grew inside me. There were moments when I tried to ignore the signs, tried to believe that maybe I was overreacting, that he was really just busy with work, that life's pressures were overwhelming him. I didn't want to believe that the man I had married, the one I had dreamed of for so long, could be pulling away from me. After all, I had given everything for that house, for that marriage. How could he be so cruel as to leave me, without even an explanation? The first sign that something was wrong came on an ordinary afternoon. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch for him, as I always did. He had promised to return early from the fields, but it was already past 3 o'clock, and he hadn't given me any news. I started to worry. I grabbed the basket of fruit and went to the gate to see if he was coming. The sun was strong that day, and I stood there, waiting, with a tight feeling in my chest. When he finally showed up, his face was tense. He seemed tired, but in a different way. It was as though he had something on his mind that he didn't want to share with me. He came inside without giving me an explanation, only telling me that he needed to rest. I, without thinking too much, simply accepted it, but my heart wasn't at ease. There was something in those eyes that I couldn't decipher, something in his posture that made me feel uncomfortable. In the days that followed, I noticed more changes. He started arriving home later and later, always with ready excuses. I had to stop by Joan's house, the fence was broken, or I went to town to buy some tools. I ended up taking longer than I thought. The excuses always made sense, but something inside me told me it wasn't just that. I felt displaced, as though I was losing touch with him, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I began to wonder if I was overreacting. Was he really just too busy with work? Was he simply tired? And more importantly, did he still love me? The fear of asking and confronting the truth paralyzed me. I didn't know if I wanted to know the answer, because deep down, what I feared most of all was seeing that the lie was growing between us. One of those nights when he came home late, he told me he needed to go out once more to handle something in town. It was late, nearly midnight, and I noticed something strange. He was more dressed up than usual. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and a tie that he never wore for work in the field. It was as if he were going somewhere important, not to take care of business. But I didn't say anything. I stayed quiet, trying to understand, trying to deal with the feeling that something was breaking, but not wanting to admit it. He left, and that time, something told me to follow. I put on a simple dress, grabbed my hat, and went after him. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was happening. When I saw him enter Antonio's house, I stopped at the corner and watched. He went inside, and the door closed behind him. My heart beat faster, and a deep pain formed in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but at the same time, a part of me already knew the truth. I went back home that night without being able to say anything. When he came back, he seemed as if nothing had happened. He entered as if everything was normal, as if nothing had been broken between us. And I, my dear, kept following the same routine, pretending to be blind, believing it was just a phase. I believed it, until the moment when I could no longer deceive myself. The following weeks were tormenting. He kept going out, coming home late, and the excuses became more and more vague. When I asked why he was so distant, he told me that work was weighing on him more than usual, that he had to pay more attention to the problems on the farm. I wanted to believe him, but there was already a pain inside me that no longer allowed me to sleep in peace. I spent the days trying not to think, trying to move on with life, but the pain consumed me little by little. I didn't know what to do with what I was feeling. I knew he was hiding something from me, but I didn't want to see it. I tried to find some logical explanation, something that justified it all. After all, we had a good life, a home, children, everything seemed perfect. How could he be drifting away like this without any explanation? Until one day, he came home earlier than usual. That day was different because he seemed anxious, even nervous. I watched him from a distance, unsure of what to expect. When he came near, he tried to embrace me, but I pulled away. Something inside me told me I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what was going on. That's when he told me he had to leave, that he was going to town again, but that he would return soon. And it was then, in that moment when he said this, that I realized something was terribly wrong. I knew he wasn't going to town. I knew he was lying to me again. Silence took over me that afternoon. I could no longer look at him the same way. He knew I knew, and I knew he knew that I knew, but neither of us spoke about it. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and cried. I cried because I knew something was breaking, but I didn't know how to fix it. I knew he was deceiving me, but I didn't know whether to face the truth or keep ignoring it. That's how, little by little, the pain became part of me. After everything that happened, I already knew, deep in my heart, that nothing would ever be the same. I couldn't look at him anymore without seeing the lie reflected in his eyes. Every word he said, every move he made, seemed empty and meaningless. What remained between us was only an echo of a love I once believed was unbreakable. But the lies, the betrayals, everything he had done, had turned all that was good into something irreparable. I knew that at some point I would need to confront him. I needed to hear the truth from him. I needed him to tell me what had happened, why he had betrayed me, what led him to do what he did. But as much as the pain consumed me and the questions piled up inside me, I didn't have the courage to ask for the answers I so desperately needed. The fear of what I might hear paralyzed me. And more than that, there was the fear that if I confronted him, I wouldn't be able to handle the truth, and everything I had built would come crashing down. The days went by, and the silence between us grew heavier. He knew what I knew. I knew what he knew, but neither of us spoke about what was going on. Silence was our way of avoiding the confrontation. I believed that if we stayed silent, things might resolve themselves in some way, as if time would erase the lies. I was deceiving myself because time, in fact, only amplified the pain. There were days when I felt strong enough to face him, to finally ask what I needed to know. But there were also days when I felt so weak, so lost, that I didn't know where to begin. I feared that if I asked, he would just give me another excuse, another lie that would make me doubt everything. I no longer wanted to live like that, but I didn't know how to escape this prison. One night, he came home later than usual. I saw him enter through the door, and I felt a wave of anger take over me. I was tired of these lies, tired of living without knowing the truth. I was exhausted from being deceived, and at that moment, something inside me broke. I stood up from the chair, went up to him and said, "I know what you did, and I want to know the truth." He looked at me with that empty look, as if he was preparing to tell me what I already knew, but he didn't say anything. He pulled away from me, as if he knew I was about to explode. I followed him through the house, each of my steps pounding on the floor. He tried to avoid my gaze, but I could no longer ignore what was in front of me. What he had done couldn't be erased, and more than anything, I wanted to know why. I needed to know what led him to betray me, what led him to destroy everything we had. But once again, he dodged the question. He told me he was tired, that he didn't have the strength to talk about it at that moment, and I, like a fool, accepted his words. I let him deceive me again. And that was it, my dear. There was no confrontation. There was no explanation. I never heard from him the truth I had been searching for. He always knew how to calm me, how to convince me that I was exaggerating, that things weren't as serious as I thought, and part of me believed him. The fear of confronting the reality made me accept everything he said, made me live in a bubble where the lies didn't have an impact. But inside, I knew I was being deceived. I knew that while he was soothing me with sweet words, the truth was falling apart between us. The confrontation that never happened was, in fact, the greatest confrontation I could have had. By not giving me the answers, he showed me that he would never be honest with me, that he would never have the courage to admit the gravity of his mistakes. And I, out of fear of the truth, ended up accepting everything without questioning anymore. But over time, I realized that silence didn't free us from the pain. On the contrary, it intensified it. I spent more years living in the lie, trying to continue with life, but growing increasingly distant from him, without knowing what to do. I knew he was deceiving me, but I didn't know whether I should face the truth or keep ignoring it. That's how, little by little, the pain became part of me. I knew, my dear, that the confrontation with the truth was inevitable. Even though time passed and I tried to ignore it, the pain that was accumulating inside me could no longer be silenced. What he did, what he hid from me, was slowly eating me up from the inside. No matter how much I tried to pretend nothing had happened, my heart wouldn't let me. The truth was chasing me, and I knew that sooner or later I would have to face it. I still remember the day I finally gathered the courage. I knew I couldn't keep living in this lie, in this silent prison. I didn't know who I was anymore, the woman I used to be. The one who trusted everything, who believed in the love we built, was disappearing. The fear of asking what was going on was replaced by an urgent need to know. I needed the truth. I needed to know why he betrayed me, why he destroyed what we had. It was a hot summer afternoon when I finally made the decision. He had left again, as usual, and I found myself alone in the house. But it wasn't an ordinary loneliness. It was a loneliness full of questions, anguish, and uncertainties. I sat on the couch, my mind racing, thinking of everything that had happened. What would I do if he confessed? What if he gave me another excuse, another lie to make me believe him? What would be left between us after so many years of deception? When he walked through the door, I didn't see him the same way anymore. I didn't see the man I married. His look, which once brought me comfort, now only brought me pain. He seemed to know what I was thinking, and that bothered me even more. I was about to ask the question I had avoided for so many years. I was about to ask for the first time what was eating me up inside. What did you do? Why did you betray me? I took a deep breath and looked at him. He seemed so uncomfortable, so nervous, and that only heightened my anxiety. I knew that in that moment, he knew it was time. The silence between us was deafening. Then, suddenly, he told me something I never imagined I would hear. He apologized. He said he was sorry for everything, that he deeply regretted what he had done. But his words didn't make sense to me. He said he never wanted to hurt me, that he had made a mistake. But hearing that, a part of me was already broken. I knew he was trying to salvage what was left of our relationship, trying to give an explanation that made sense to him. But for me, those words had no value anymore. I did this because I felt lost, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was confused, and it was a mistake I can't erase. But my dear, how is it possible to erase something like this? How can you erase love, trust, the years of dedication, everything we built together? I didn't know if he was telling the truth, or if that was just another lie to calm me down, to make me forgive him. Those words were empty to me. They didn't heal the pain I was feeling. They didn't erase the feeling of betrayal, of despair. I only knew that, at that moment, I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. I stepped back, not knowing what to do with his words. He stood there, waiting for a reaction he probably didn't know what would be. I didn't know if I should forgive him, if I should stay with him, or if it was better to end it all right then. But I knew that, in that moment, a part of me was already gone, and that part would never come back. I spent that entire night unable to sleep. What he told me, what he revealed, didn't bring me peace. I was still filled with questions, with doubts. The truth he told me was no longer enough. I wanted more. I wanted to understand everything. I wanted him to be honest with me, to tell me the complete truth. But that never happened. That night was the hardest of all. I knew that, deep down, I could no longer go back to being who I was before. The trust had been broken, and his words, even asking for forgiveness, couldn't restore what he had destroyed. I knew that what was left between us would never be the same, no matter how hard he tried to explain himself. I didn't know what our future would look like from then on. I didn't know if I would be able to forgive him, to move on with him, or if the lies, the betrayal, had left too deep a mark for forgiveness to be possible. But I knew that in that moment, confronting the truth would change everything, and that from then on, I would have to learn to live with this new reality, with the pain and with the doubt, not knowing what the future would hold for us. The days went by, and with time, the words of apology he gave me couldn't erase the pain that had settled between us. I still lived with that weight in my chest, that feeling that the lie had driven a permanent wedge between us. I tried, in every way, to find a way to move forward, to convince myself that, despite everything, the love we once had could still be restored. But nothing seemed to make sense. What once seemed like a life full of promises and dreams was now shrouded in sorrow and regret. He fell ill. I watched, slowly, as the man I had shared my life with, the man who seemed so strong, became weak and dependent. And though it was hard to see him like that, part of me felt that he was paying for everything he had done. The pain I had felt, the suffering that consumed me, now seemed to be mirrored in his own body. I, who had spent so many years trying to understand what he had done, was now faced with a broken man, trying to recover what he had lost. It was then, on a cold winter's night, that he asked for my forgiveness. He was no longer the strong, imposing man I had known. He was weak, pale, and his eyes reflected a sorrow greater than anything he could have done. He called me to sit beside him, and with a hoarse voice said words I never imagined hearing from him. "I know I hurt you. I destroyed our life. There's nothing I can do to undo it, but I need you to forgive me. I'm a lost man, and I know the pain I caused cannot be erased, but if you can, give me this last chance to show you that, at least I regret everything I've done." I looked at him, and for a moment, my mind was in turmoil. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know whether I should believe him, whether forgiveness was possible, or if he truly deserved it. For so long, I had carried the pain of betrayal, the weight of the lie, and now I was faced with a man who, although apologizing, no longer seemed like the man I had married. I knew he was in his final days. He was ill, and the end seemed imminent. But I also knew that my decision to forgive him couldn't be based on his sickness or the guilt he felt. I had to be honest with myself. I had to understand if, deep down, I could still find a place for forgiveness. I no longer knew who he was to me, or if forgiveness was something I needed to give to him or to myself. He drew closer to me, as if waiting for an answer, and for a moment I thought of everything we had lived, the promises we had made, the love that once existed between us. But at the same time, I remembered the pain, the betrayal, and all the lies he had told me over the years. What should I do? How could I simply forgive, as he hoped, after everything that had happened? I knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily. It wouldn't be an act of will, but something that would, little by little, be built. I knew that, if I truly wanted to free myself from this pain, I would have to find a way to leave the past behind. But I wasn't ready, not in that moment. I looked at him and said, "I don't know. I can't forgive you right now. I don't know if I'll ever be able to, but I forgive you for you understanding how much you hurt me, and maybe, one day, the forgiveness will become lighter." He looked at me with an expression I didn't know how to read. There was pain in his eyes, but also a sense that he knew that, even without words, there was something between us. It wasn't complete forgiveness, nor reconciliation, but perhaps it was a beginning. It was the beginning of something I no longer knew would be possible. From that moment on, I knew that my life with him, everything we had built, had come to an end. Even if he tried, even if he asked for forgiveness, trust, once broken, could never be restored. He left, as I knew he would. But before leaving, he left me with one last lesson. Forgiveness is not an obligation, but a choice, something that, in my heart, I would have to decide whether he deserved or not. I, who had spent so much time trying to understand, finally realized that forgiveness wasn't for him. Forgiveness was for me, so I could move on, so I could finally free myself from the weight of the pain he caused me. Time went by, my dear. What once seemed like an inevitable end began to drag on, like a weight that never seemed to end. I watched the days pass slowly, and within me, the pain of betrayal never fully faded. He was still there, by my side, but somehow, he was no longer the man I knew. He was sick, growing weaker, and deep in my heart, a part of me knew that the end was drawing near. But even knowing that, I didn't know what to do with the pain I still carried. He didn't give me any more explanations. He had already apologized, but he never told me what I needed to hear. The truth, the answer to so many questions, remained absent, and I felt as though I was being punished with pain he could no longer fix. In his final days, we both seemed to live in a deep silence, in an empty space where everything we had lived was lost. He didn't speak anymore about what happened. I didn't speak anymore about what I felt. And still, the truth kept haunting me. He left quietly, as if, in the end, he wanted to avoid any confrontation. He didn't have the strength to tell me what really happened, what led him to do what he did, or even why he never had the courage to be honest with me. He died without explaining, and I was left there with all the questions that would never be answered. His death didn't bring relief, and I didn't know what to feel. Perhaps a part of me wanted to feel relief, wanted to feel that finally the pain he caused me was being punished, but I couldn't. I only felt a great loss, not for his absence, but for the lack of an explanation that would never come. I was left alone with my questions, with my doubts. The forgiveness he asked for wasn't enough to give me peace. I still wondered why he did what he did, why he destroyed everything we had, why he never had the courage to be honest with me. He always knew how to deceive me, and in that final moment, he deceived me once more. He left, without giving me the answer I had longed for, and no matter how much he regretted, his words could no longer erase the pain. They could no longer give me the truth I so desperately sought. I didn't know what to do with the feeling that something was incomplete, that something in me would never be the same. The forgiveness I offered wasn't for him, but for myself. I realized, over time, that I needed to let go of the answers, that perhaps I would never know everything that happened. But more than anything, I needed to accept what was happening inside me. I needed to understand that, no matter how much he deceived me, life was still offering me the chance to move forward. His death, though sad, brought me a sense of liberation. I knew I didn't need to wait for the answers that would never come. I no longer saw him as the man I once loved. He no longer had the power to control me, to make me suffer. And, although the pain of betrayal was still present, I knew it was time to move on. He left without explaining, without giving me what I wanted, but I finally realized that the answers I had longed for were not in him, but in me. I let him go, my dear. I let him go without more questions, without more answers. And although the scars he left on me couldn't be erased, I learned that the only person who could heal them was me. I learned that to move forward, I needed to leave the questions unanswered and focus on building my future, whatever was possible, with the lessons I had learned. After his death, my life was never the same. I had carried the weight of the lie, the pain, the fear of confronting him for so many years, and somehow, I believed that, with time, things would improve. But what I didn't know was that the pain I felt wouldn't be the only burden I would have to carry. The pain of betrayal transformed into something even heavier, the judgment of the community. In our small town, where everyone knew everyone else's business, gossip never stopped. Now, I was alone, without him, without his lies to protect me, and somehow, that made me vulnerable. I knew people had already spoken about me, had made assumptions, but when he died, things changed. I became the center of conversation, the focus of stares, the object of a morbid curiosity that gave me no peace. The first weeks after his death were a whirlwind. I was in mourning, trying to understand what had happened and how to move forward. And yet, I couldn't even step outside without feeling the weight of people's gazes upon me. I felt them whispering behind my back, their eyes piercing through my skin. I knew what they thought of me. They thought I knew more than I let on. They thought I had been complicit, or worse still, they thought I didn't care. The town wasn't large, and rumors spread like wildfire. I began to hear things that cut me like knives. She knew everything. How could she have let things get this far? She never questioned, never sought to know. Now she's crying, but it's too late. The words of others poured into my ears like poison, and there was nothing I could do to silence them. Their judgment was relentless, and I didn't know how to bear it. Every time I went to church, it felt like everyone was watching me, waiting for some answer that I didn't know how to give. Those women, who had always been my friends, now didn't know what to say to me. They avoided me, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid I would blame them. And the men, Those who once greeted me with respect now only looked at me with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. I was seen as a dishonored woman, someone who had been deceived but had also done nothing to prevent it. And the pain that was already inside me, now intensified. I didn't know how to fight against it. I didn't know how to deal with the cruel words of the town, with the reproachful glances that followed me wherever I went. I wanted to shout at them that it wasn't my fault, that I knew nothing, but what would that achieve? They had already decided who I was, and nothing else mattered. I, who had trusted him, who had believed that the marriage I built was real, now found myself wrapped in lies that even he was unable to undo. The days passed, and solitude seemed to consume me even more. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Those people, who once seemed to be friends, now pulled away from me, and those who still came near were just curious, wanting to know every detail of my pain, every piece of my story. It was as if, by seeing me suffer, they felt better, stronger, purer. I felt small, crushed under the pressure of being judged for something I couldn't control. It was when Donna Selina, who had always been my friend, came to me. She came to me with a sad look, with an expression of someone who knew everything that was happening, but didn't know how to help. She hugged me, and with a soft voice said, "My dear, you need to be strong. I know everyone is talking, but the truth is that no one really knows what happened. Don't let other people's opinions define you. Only you know what you lived. Only you know what you did for him." Her words were a balm to my soul, but they were also a cruel reminder that, in some way, I still needed to prove something to the world. I knew that to continue with my life, I would have to rid myself of the weight of others' judgment. But how could I do that when the rest of the town seemed to look at me with such contempt? I wondered if I would ever find peace in my life again, if I would ever be able to walk down the streets without being looked at with so much judgment. I felt as if I were carrying not only the pain of betrayal, but also the shame others were trying to impose on me. And no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't escape it. I couldn't hide from the reality that had been thrust upon me. The judgment of the community was relentless, and I had to learn how to live with it. But little by little, I realized that no matter how much they talked, the only thing that truly mattered was how I felt in my heart. The pain, the shame, the weight of what he had done, and the weight of others' judgment might try to destroy me, but I wouldn't allow it. I would choose to move forward, with or without the forgiveness of those around me. Over the years, my life began to follow a path I hadn't imagined. The silence of pain, that emptiness I carried inside me, seemed to diminish little by little, but it never completely disappeared. The truth, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, remained there, marking my life in a silent but immensely powerful way. The healing process was not something simple, as I wished it had been. There was no magical moment that suddenly erased everything I lived through, everything that was done to me. Healing was a constant effort, an internal struggle I had to face every day. I began to realize that to move forward, I needed to learn how to live with the lie. The pain couldn't be erased, the scars wouldn't disappear, but I didn't want that to be what defined who I was. I had the right to be more than a woman betrayed, more than a woman who lived under the shadow of his lies. I knew that forgiveness, if it ever happened, would be more for me than for him, and that forgiveness, if it came, wouldn't be instant. It would be a building process, a daily decision, something I would choose rather than something imposed upon me. I started to distance myself from pain and anger, little by little, not because I wanted to forget what he did, but because I realized that living in constant anger wouldn't get me anywhere. Anger kept me prisoner to the past. It prevented me from seeing things clearly. As hard as it was, I had to look to the future, even without knowing what it would bring. I knew that if I kept holding on to what he did, I would never have peace. So I started to take small steps. Over time, moments of solitude became lighter. I learned to occupy myself with other things: work, my children, the friendships that, though slightly weakened by distance, were still there, offering me their support. I dedicated myself to my well-being and sought out moments of joy, like those simple walks in the fields where I could hear the birds singing and feel the lightness of life around me. Those moments, no matter how small, gave me a sense that there was still something good waiting for me. I also began to understand that, although the pain of betrayal and the lie would never completely disappear, It didn't have to define me. I was no longer the woman who hid in silence, afraid of being rejected, of being judged. I learned to be honest with myself, to accept my pain, to understand that there was no shame in feeling everything I had felt. I learned to respect my feelings and give myself permission to live, even with the scars. It was a painful lesson, but a necessary one. I realized that healing doesn't come from simply forgetting what hurt us, but from learning how to live with it. Forgiveness, although something I was still seeking in my heart, didn't depend on him asking for it or not. Forgiveness was something that grew in me over time, gradually. I didn't know exactly when it happened, but one day I realized that I no longer felt the pain at the same level. I no longer felt the hatred that had consumed me for so long. And although the wound never fully disappeared, it no longer had the same power over me. I finally felt free, for the first time, to live my life, to move on. It was through this healing process that I learned the importance of loving myself, respecting myself, putting myself first. I could no longer live for the expectations of others, nor for his mistakes. I needed to find my own peace, the peace he was never able to give me. And little by little, I discovered that true freedom comes from within us, from our ability to forgive ourselves, to understand that we are worthy of a full life, even after the pain. I learned that, with time, the lie became just one part of what I lived. It no longer defined me. It no longer had the power to make me suffer. What I lived with him was just one page of my story, a page that, as painful as it was, could not be the last. I still had much to live, much to discover about myself. And, as difficult as it was, I knew the healing process was finally leading me to a place where I could begin again. Today, looking back, I can finally see the lesson life tried to teach me. There were years of suffering, pain, and anguish, but over time, I learned that everything I went through, no matter how hard, made me stronger. I used to believe that his betrayal, the lie he built around us, would be the end of everything for me. But in the end, I realized that, in fact, it was only the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter where I learned to be stronger, more true to myself, and freer. Forgiveness was, for me, the key to freedom. It took me a long time to understand this, but I finally realized that no matter how much he had betrayed me, no matter how much he had deceived me, what he did could no longer control me. Forgiveness wasn't about him. He would never have the power to give me complete forgiveness. Forgiveness was something I needed to give to myself, something I needed to give myself in order to move on. I learned that forgiveness isn't easy. It's not a process that happens overnight, as people often say. Forgiveness is something that is built over time, something that strengthens with every step we take to leave the pain behind. I couldn't just forget everything that happened, but by forgiving, I began to free myself from the pain. I began to free myself from the memories that held me to the past. Forgiveness gave me the courage to look to the future, to see that I still had a life ahead of me, a life that didn't need to be defined by his lies. I know that for many, forgiveness would be impossible. They would look at me and say that I was being weak, that I was allowing him to win in some way. But the truth, my dear, is that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's not about him being worthy of forgiveness, but about me being worthy of peace. I was no longer going to allow his pain to dominate me, his lie to steal my inner peace. Forgiveness was my way of taking control of my life again, of recovering and moving on, with or without him by my side. Freedom was another lesson that life taught me. Freedom from not depending on others' approval, from not living for what people thought of me. For so long, I lived trying to please, trying to meet others' expectations, especially those of the people who judged me. But over time, I learned that the only opinion that truly mattered was my own. I needed to live for myself, not for others. The freedom I found wasn't just the freedom of not carrying the pain of betrayal anymore, but the freedom to be who I really am, without fear of being judged, without fear of being rejected. I learned to accept myself, to love myself, even with all my scars. And by learning to love myself, I also learned to value everything life still had to offer me. Forgiveness gave me the freedom to be happy again, to see the beauty in life, even if it still had its imperfections. I understood that, although the past was a part of my story, it didn't have to be what defined me. I was no longer the woman who lived in the shadow of a lie. I was no longer the woman who lived in constant pain. I was a free woman who chose to live with courage, with hope, and above all, with the certainty that I deserved to be happy. Life taught me that forgiveness is the path to freedom, and by forgiving myself, I finally found peace. The lesson that remains, my dear, is that no one has the power to destroy us unless we allow it. I chose not to allow him or anyone else to make me believe that I wasn't worthy of love, happiness, or freedom. I chose to be strong, to be free, to be the owner of my own story. And that was the greatest lesson I learned. If you liked Grandma's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can hear more stories like this and share them with other people who might be inspired by this story of overcoming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a similar situation? How did you react? A kiss on the heart from all of you, and until the next story.